I'll start this off by saying that I'm not a professional meteorologist or any kind of climate scientist, nor am I a therapist. And I'm not here to discuss what it is, or how bad it is, or even if global warming is real or not. I personally do believe it to be real, but I don't think that matters much in the subject we're talking about today, which is climate anxiety. After all, we can be just as anxious about things that aren't real as things that are. I'm also going to say I don't intend to give any advice, only offer a window into my life on how my thinking around this topic has shifted. Maybe the retelling of my experience will help inspire or ease something inside of you. That is my hope. So I think the earliest I learned about climate anxiety was in grade school. I remember being taught water-saving techniques, such as turning off the shower while you're lathering your hair, or turning off the faucet while you're brushing your teeth. Things like that. But it didn't really hit me how serious the situation was until I was in college, I believe. It sure is a wild experience to be told that humanity itself is setting the world on fire. And when I first articulated this, I was upset, a little horrified. Mostly, I felt helpless. I was in computer science at the time, and I was already severely depressed. So I figured I was just another victim of the big corporations, dragged unwillingly along for the ride. The thing is, even though I was in an unrelated field, and as far as I was aware, my family wasn't deeply or intimately involved in big oil more than any of us today are, I also felt guilty and ashamed because I'm human, and humans supposedly contributed to this. So even though I personally didn't do much, I felt as though I should be doing more. Fighting back, something like that. Well, as I grew older, one of the key concepts that I adopted that helped me move towards a better mindset was the acknowledgement of how little power I had. Not just in the context of global warming, but over others, over a life, even over myself. Because if I'd had more power over myself, I would choose not to be depressed, nor to have crippling social anxiety, or have a number of self-sabotaging behaviors. This mindset helped relieve me of a lot of the responsibility and guilt. It helped me to start piecing my life back together after a pretty traumatized childhood. And when I first adopted this mindset, I would look at all the people today who talk authoritatively in what they say, telling the viewer or participant that such and such paradigm or strategy or what have you was a guarantee. And I thought, what do they know that I don't? Because to get where I was, I had to work on letting go of the idea of control over my life. So obviously, these people who were financially successful and had a huge following must have known something I didn't. They spoke with so much confidence that I thought, well, it must be true. This person doesn't seem like the kind of person to lie, and they obviously have a good enough reputation to have amassed followers. And I generally believed in, and still do believe in, people's desire to do good for the world. The problem for me was, and I followed these concepts, and I ran into walls I couldn't surmount. I've tried cold calling several times in my life, and having dialed over 200 people at this point, I can say with certainty that I still absolutely suck at it today. It still gives me hellish anxiety to think about, to do, to get rejected. I could not stick it out. So I felt that there must have been something defective with me, you know? If what people said was true, and I was proving it to be false, I thought the problem was with me, because they made it work. They have or had financial success. Meanwhile, I consistently lost money on every venture I attempted. Now, when I think about it today, I've had a lot more time to get to know people as a species. And I'm not an expert any more than most lay people are. But what helped me get over my social anxiety was the steady realization that most people were the same at the core as me. And again, this is just my theory. Right or wrong, it helped reduce the anxiety and resistance I needed not to be a complete hermit. So since it helped me, I adopted it as one of my views of the world, and I think it's helped me pretty decently. It's gotten me some problems too, but I think the advantages outweigh the cons. It took me a while to get to the conclusion I'm about to share with you, despite having both these beliefs. That I personally had far less power than I initially believed in the world, and that people are similar to me at the core. But eventually, I did come to my personal conclusion, and that was that people honestly and truly believed in what they said. But they didn't have a full understanding of the world. And I realize how that might sound. Stick around long enough and you'll see I've got a pride streak a mile high. I could be right, or I could be wrong, but that's my reigning theory I'm going with right now. So how does this relate to climate anxiety? Well, I personally think that people, at least the majority, will claim that Something is the unequivocal truth because it gives people a sense of control. In my experience, not having control over something is pretty scary. Not having a guarantee is pretty scary. I thought because I had a degree in computer science that I would be set for life, as my dad said. He didn't say, well, you should be good to go. You'll probably always have a job. You know, so long as no crazy black swan event happens or the world gets thrown into a pandemic, and so long as you actually do programming when you get into your job, and so long as you have the mental and emotional capacity to handle the stresses of being an employee. And you know, I'm very fortunate because my college was actually paid off for me. So I never had to take any loans. But if I had to guess, that's probably why my father said those things. I mean, I'm sure most of him probably believed it. But that belief might also have been influenced by the fact that, you know, college isn't cheap, and he probably didn't want to believe that with the thousands of dollars he put in that I could one day be facing homelessness. So now I'm going to extrapolate this little theory onto climate anxiety. I think we can pretty safely say that no one individual, no one mortal anyway, could single-handedly stop climate change. So there's the first layer of lack of control. And if global warming is a thing, that includes everyone. And individuals are part of everyone, so there's the second layer of lack of control. There's the fact that big oil is deeply woven into our society because when we discovered it, it was the best thing ever. And we didn't realize the extent of damage we'd done till it already had deep roots. So there's another layer of lack of control. I could keep going like this for a while. Now bear with me a second because the next theory I'm going to propose might seem counterintuitive. I believe that declaring that there is nothing we can do to completely stop it, that this global warming is inevitable, actually gives us back a sense of control. I think that it helps lessen anxiety by a degree, because now you personally are not to blame. You don't have to keep looking at this serious problem and keep trying to come up with new ways to fix it and potentially face failure after failure, which reinforces that belief that it really is out of our control. Here's another thing that I think I've noticed. I believe people don't really like change all that much for various reasons, but I think the main one is circling back to that control. I think that a lot of people probably stay stuck in certain situations because they might be bad, but at least they're predictable. New things and being flexible and having adaptations tend to take more energy and more effort than sticking to the routine. At least I think they do for most people. And when you consider the surveys that say there's a mental health pandemic, that makes sense. In my personal experience, poor mental health is a huge destroyer of energy. In my case, if I'm faced with massive change during a time where I'm feeling particularly low, I just shut down. I either cry or sob or go silent, and I'm practically immobile. And at that point is probably where I have the least control of all. And it probably is for most people too. So chewing on these ideas for a bit gets me to this conclusion. People hate the idea of global warming because it seems to be out of our control. And if it does happen, there will be massive changes to the world, which most people probably won't be ready for. So those are pretty good reasons to hate the idea of it, in my opinion. So what's different with me? I mean, it seems pretty promising that if I'm chill talking about this, that I probably don't have as much anxiety over the topic as most people do, and I think I probably don't. Anxiety has been a huge part of my life, so I've spent a lot of time trying to mitigate and lessen it where I could. Climate change is one of those areas. Now, this is a pretty charged topic with a lot of emotion behind it, so I'll do my best not to step on toes and to be respectful where I can. It goes without saying that you're free to disagree with me, and I'm sorry in advance if this ends up triggering or upsetting you somehow. My intent here is only to present my thoughts and hopefully help people a bit with their climate anxiety. So big oil's been painted as the big bad for some time now, and research seems to show that they're contributing to global warming if they're not some of the biggest contributors. So before I dive deeper into this, I encourage you to humor me for a moment. Or if you can't, it might be better for you not to watch any more of this video. That is entirely up to you. Now, I believe that people generally want to do good for their society and environment. After all, at the bare minimum, we as creatures are a part of the society and environment, and naturally we'd want to live in a quality society and environment because of the advantages it offers us. More than that, I think it's actually a deep desire to want to do good for your society and environment. Just slightly off tangent, but generally I attribute deep desires to things that would tie in with evolutionary success as a species. So we've been a social species for pretty much our entire existence. So it makes sense that nature would favor those who benefit and empower the society as a whole, because a better society tends to offer more advantages. Things like trading resources and specializing, requiring some level of trust that, your neighbor isn't going to shoot you when you approach them for said trade. And yes, I'm saying people working for big oil probably have those desires too. Now, desires can be overridden and overruled, and because people have agency, they may choose to make certain sacrifices for better or for worse. I still think that those core desires stubbornly remain because, as I mentioned, I think it tends to be a pretty naturally advantageous adaptation for survival in general. But I'm no biologist, so you can take my words with a grain of salt. So putting aside big oil for a moment, if you can, at least, I'd like to invite you to consider a narrative. You have a decent little house, and one day you decide to go out back and dig up some ground to plant a tree. You dig the ground up and hit something hard. You pull a rock out, or at least what you think is a rock at first. But then you clean off the dirt and discover that it's actually gold. So you call a local underground specialist or what have you, and you get some tests done, and you discover that you are actually sitting on what's believed to be an enormous gold vein. This gold vein will obviously not only give you financial freedom, but it will change the life of your family forever, boost the local economy, and provide hundreds of jobs to workers. And so you get as much value out of it as you can. And after a century or so, the system's pretty well established, made efficient, and your neighborhood has become tremendously upscale. The benefits go on and on. And then your descendant discovers that gold is actually highly radioactive, and unearthing it has led to a vast amount of people with defects, birthing issues, deaths. Animals and plants are also suffering. And remember, this is just a narrative. As far as I know, gold isn't that highly radioactive, but it is for the purposes of this story. And sure, you might have noticed one or two concerning little coincidences early on, but the world is a big place, so it makes that sense that given a big enough sample, you'll have one or two outliers. But it turns out that they weren't coincidences. Instead, they were warning signs of the future. Small enough to ignore for the moment, and with devastating consequences should one look any closer. And now, the whole world is looking at you, picking you apart, and viewing you as the devil himself. When just a little while ago, you were one of the most highly respected, reputable, and loved influential families who had brought the world into an age of prosperity. All right, so if you haven't left yet, I tip my hat to you. And I'm sure this will spark some angry comments if this video gets any traction. How might I paint such an insidious industry in the light of a victim? Now, I want to start off by saying that I don't believe that circumstances absolve a person or group of persons of responsibility or autonomy. In fact, I am a huge proponent of owning up to your slice of pie. A serial killer might have had a tortured, inconceivable childhood, but that doesn't excuse them of the murders of innocent people. So then, why bring up this story at all? I personally believe a little compassion and understanding goes a long way. And I know that might also fire some people up, saying there's no excuse for what big oil has done. And I agree. Big oil isn't excused in the same way that the serial killer isn't in my eyes. I can also look at the narrative above and can concede that, yeah, that story seems pretty rough, you know. The intent at the beginning was never malicious. If we'd known early on about the devastating consequences, maybe the world would be in a very different place today. Who knows? It's an interesting narrative to chew on, I think. As for climate change as a whole, I think it'll probably be pretty rough, that a lot of people will suffer. I also think that humans are an amazingly adaptive and innovative race. I'll give a link in the description and go on the record to say I'm not sponsored or anything, but I personally find the company Deltec to be an incredible example of this. Their hurricane-resistant homes are literally designed to measure up to gale winds, flooding rains, and large debris pounding against them. In areas where hurricanes have torn through, there have been photos to show the core building almost completely unscathed, while the next door neighbor's house was no more than a pile of rubble. That is absolutely phenomenal innovation. And I believe that advancements like that are exactly what the human race needs as we face the upcoming changes that global warming will bring. Deltec took a look at the current situation and asked, how do we resolve the problem as it stands? And I believe accepting the reality of the current situation will help us both gain back some control and face the unknown, chaotic, and exciting future together.